I still couldn't believe I was here at this exact moment, in this place. Of all the nights, it had to be this one. It was a warm Friday night in late August, the kind where the air feels thick with anticipation, as if anything could happen. I'd been invited to Alexis's party, though in reality, I had been dragged there by my buddy Jake. He'd promised it would be a night to remember. As I looked around at the dimly lit room, packed with people and music thumping through the walls, I had no idea just how right he was. Alexis was there, of course, always the life of the party, with that natural confidence that could stop anyone in their tracks. I'd known her for years, but tonight something about her seemed different. Maybe it was the way her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, or how her dress fit just perfectly. Whatever it was, I couldn't look away. The energy between us felt electric. Every time she glanced in my direction, I felt a spark. We'd never really spoken much before, sure, we were in the same circles, but I had always figured she was out of my league. But tonight was different. We were close enough now that when she brushed past me to grab another drink, I could feel the warmth of her skin. "Are you having fun, Max?" she asked, her voice playful, almost teasing. She was standing a bit too close for a casual conversation, and I could feel my heart racing. "Yeah," I muttered, trying to stay cool, though the look in her eyes made it hard to focus. There was something daring about her tonight, something unpredictable. Then, out of nowhere, she took my hand, her fingers curled around mine gently. Yet there was a warmth in her touch that made my head spin. This wasn't just a casual gesture. My mind flashed back to Jake's warning earlier, "Dude, don't get too close. She's trouble." But as she led me through the crowd, I couldn't bring myself to care. I followed her down a narrow hallway, my pulse quickening with every step. The sounds of the party faded as we reached a small, dimly lit room. The air felt heavier now, charged with an unspoken tension. Alexis closed the door behind us, and the soft click of the lock echoed louder than the music from the party. Suddenly, it was just the two of us alone. The tension between us was thick and palpable, electric. She smiled at me, but it wasn't the same smile I was used to. There was something darker about it, something dangerous. "I've seen the way you look at me, Max," she said, her voice low and hushed, sending a shiver down my spine. "I know you want this." My throat was dry, and I struggled to find my voice. This wasn't the Alexis I thought I knew. She was bold, unpredictable, and I had no idea what to do next. Before I could respond, she stepped closer, her body mere inches from mine. I could feel the heat of her breath against my neck, and my heart raced even faster. She reached up and pulled me toward her, her hand tangling in my hair. "I shouldn't be doing this," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but there was a fierce, undeniable determination in her eyes. "But I can't help it." Before I could process what was happening, her lips were on mine, soft but insistent, like she'd been waiting for this moment for just as long as I had. The kiss was everything, sweet, intense, and full of a passion that had been building between us for who knows how long. For a moment, the world disappeared. It was just the two of us caught in the heat of the moment. Her scent overwhelmed me, intoxicating. And as she parted her lips, letting me taste her, my hands found their way to her waist, pulling her closer. Reality crashed back in when I realized what we were doing. This was Alexis, the girl who had a boyfriend, the one who was supposed to be off limits. But here we were, breaking every rule, crossing every line we had sworn not to. I pulled away, breathless. "Alexis, we can't do this," I whispered, even though every part of me was screaming to keep going. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, vulnerable yet determined. "I know," she said softly, "but I don't care." Then she kissed me again, harder this time, and I knew there was no turning back. With every kiss, every touch, we were falling deeper into something we couldn't control. Her hand slid down my chest, tracing the muscles beneath my shirt, and she pressed herself closer. My body responded instantly, heat flooding through me as I pulled her tighter against me. And in a flash, we were tumbling onto the bed, tangled in a mess of limbs, lost in the heat of the moment. Her skin was warm beneath my hands, and the way she moved against me made it impossible to think clearly. Everything about her felt intoxicating, and I was powerless to resist. But as things began to escalate, a small voice in the back of my mind reminded me of one undeniable truth. This was wrong. This was forbidden. Yet, the more wrong it felt, the more right it seemed. The room was spinning, and my head was too, as our bodies moved together, our breaths coming in sharp, uneven gasps. I was lost in her, completely, utterly consumed by the need to be close to her. But in the back of my mind, I knew this couldn't last. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down around us. Every touch, every whisper between us seemed to spark something dangerous, something exhilarating. Alexis's breath was quick against my neck, her body pressed so tightly to mine that it felt like we were two halves of a whole. As we lay there on the bed, her fingers traced lines down my chest, sending a shudder through me. The tension between us was electric. I knew I should have stopped. I should have gotten up, walked away, and pretended none of this had ever happened. But I couldn't. Not now. Her lips found my skin again, trailing from my neck to my collarbone. Each kiss sent a jolt of electricity straight to my core. "Max," she whispered, her voice full of longing, her lips so close to mine. "I've wanted this for so long." Her words hit me hard. I wasn't the only one feeling this pull. She had wanted me just as much as I had wanted her. And now, finally, we were here. But there was something about the way she said it, almost as though she was confessing something deep, something she had kept hidden for too long. It made my heart race even faster. This wasn't just some fleeting moment. This was real, and that terrified me. Before I could say anything, her lips were on mine again, more urgent this time, more desperate. I kissed her back with the same intensity, my hands roaming over her body, feeling every curve, every inch of her I had only dreamed about. The tension between us was unbearable, like we were both teetering on the edge of something huge, something we couldn't stop, even if we wanted to. My hands slid beneath her dress, my fingers brushing against her thigh. She let out a soft sigh, her body arching closer to mine. The sound sent a rush of heat through me, and I couldn't help but push further, wanting more of her, needing to feel all of her. Her skin was soft, her body warm, and the way she responded to my touch was driving me wild. But just as things were about to escalate, she froze. Her body tensed, and her hands stilled against my chest. For a moment, I thought I had crossed a line, but then I saw the look in her eyes, fear. "Wait," she whispered, her voice shaky. Her eyes darted toward the door. We shouldn't." I followed her gaze, my heart racing. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about us anymore. It was about the consequences. If anyone found out, if her boyfriend found out, it would be a disaster. The thought of what could happen if we got caught was enough to bring me back to reality, if only for a moment. I pulled back, breathing heavily, my mind racing. "Alexis, we don't have to do this," I said, though every part of me screamed to keep going. "We can stop right now." But the look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She didn't want to stop. She wanted this just as much as I did. Maybe even more. Her fingers gripped my shirt, pulling me back toward her. "No," she whispered, her voice full of determination. "I don't care anymore. I want you, Max. I need you." Her words hit me like a spark to dry tinder, igniting every doubt, every hesitation, until it all vanished. All that mattered was her. Right here, right now. I kissed her again, harder this time, my hands sliding up her thighs as I pulled her closer. The tension between us snapped, and suddenly we were both lost in each other, caught in the heat of the moment. Clothes were discarded, tossed carelessly onto the floor, as we gave in to the desire that had been simmering between us for so long. Her skin was hot beneath my touch, her breath coming in soft gasps as I kissed her neck, her chest, every inch of her that I could reach. The sound of her voice, breathless and needy, sent waves of heat through me, and I could feel the same fire burning inside her. But even as we got lost in the moment, that small voice in the back of my mind kept whispering that this was wrong, that we were playing with fire. And the more we ignored it, the hotter the flames burned. I tried to ignore the growing sense of unease in my chest, but it was getting louder with each passing moment. "Alexis," I whispered against her skin, my voice shaky. What about him? For a moment, her body stiffened under mine, and I thought she was going to stop everything. But then she shook her head, her fingers tightening around my shoulders. He doesn't matter, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Not right now, not tonight. Her words shot through me like a burst of adrenaline. She was right, tonight it was just us. Nothing else mattered. No consequences, no fallout, just this moment, the two of us together. I pushed everything else from my mind as I kissed her again. Harder this time. My hands roamed across her body, each touch pulling us closer. The heat between us was almost unbearable, and I could feel her heart racing against mine, the rhythm of our bodies syncing. Every kiss, every movement felt like we were feeding off each other's energy, pushing one another further, deeper into something neither of us could control. When our bodies finally came together, it was as though the world outside ceased to exist. The only thing that mattered was the two of us, lost in each other. It was raw, intense, unlike anything I had ever felt before. Even in the heat of the moment, I knew I was in way over my head, but I didn't care. Afterward, as we lay tangled in the sheets, the reality of what had just happened started to sink in. Alexis was quiet beside me, her fingers lightly tracing patterns on my chest, both of us staring up at the ceiling, lost in our own thoughts. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, heavy with the weight of everything that had just transpired and everything that would follow. I turned to look at her, my heart pounding in my chest. Alexis, what are we going to do? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she kept her eyes fixed on the ceiling, her lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, she sighed, turning to face me. Her eyes were filled with something I couldn't quite read. I don't know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I really don't know. And just like that, the full weight of reality crashed down on us. What we had done, what we had just crossed, was suddenly too real to ignore. The silence in the room felt thick, suffocating, like the walls were closing in on us. Alexis had turned her back to me, curling up on the edge of the bed, her breathing slow and steady, but quiet. I could feel the tension between us, the unspoken words lingering in the air, thick and heavy, like a storm about to break. I wanted to say something, anything to break the silence, but what could I say? We had crossed a line, one we could never uncross. No matter how good it had felt in that moment, I knew the fallout would be brutal. My mind was racing, running through every possible scenario of what might happen if anyone found out, if he found out. Alexis's boyfriend, Zach, wasn't a small obstacle. The guy had a temper. If he ever found out about what had happened between us, it wouldn't just be messy, it could get dangerous. My pulse quickened at the thought, my chest tightening with anxiety. I should go, I said quietly, my voice barely louder than a whisper. I didn't want to disturb the uneasy stillness between us, but as soon as the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Alexis shifted, and for a moment, I thought she was going to ask me to stay. Part of me wished she would, despite the whirlwind of guilt and confusion in my chest. The thought of leaving her now, after everything we had just shared, felt wrong. But another part of me knew that staying would only make things worse. Finally, she spoke. Maybe you're right, she whispered, her voice soft and laced with uncertainty. Maybe it's better if you go. Her words cut deeper than I expected, sharper than I had imagined. I sat up, feeling the cool air hit my skin. I reached for my clothes scattered across the floor, each movement slow, deliberate, like I was delaying the inevitable. I couldn't shake the feeling that once I walked out that door, things between us would never be the same again. I had barely pulled my shirt over my head when Alexis spoke again. Her voice was softer this time, almost vulnerable. Max! I froze, turning to look at her. She had shifted in bed, sitting up, the sheets wrapped around her body. The dim light from the hallway cast a soft glow over her face, and I could see the conflict in her eyes, the same uncertainty I was feeling. What happens now? She asked, her voice wavering. I didn't have an answer. Hell, I didn't even know what was going to happen in the next 5 minutes, let alone tomorrow or the days after. All I knew was that things were about to get very, very complicated. I don't know, I admitted, my voice heavy with the weight of the unknown. "But we can't keep doing this." She looked down, her fingers nervously playing with the edge of the sheet. "I don't regret it," she said quietly, almost as if trying to convince herself as much as me. "I meant what I said earlier. I've wanted this, wanted you for a long time." Her words sent a surge of conflicting emotions through me. Part of me wanted to believe her, to think that what we had just shared was more than a mistake. But the truth was undeniable. It was wrong. We had broken a rule, a promise. And no matter how much we tried to justify it, we couldn't ignore that fact. "Alexis," I started, but the words got caught in my throat. How could I tell her that I felt the same? That I had been thinking about her for months, fantasizing about moments like this. Even though I knew better, the truth was, as much as I wanted her, I couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at me. We had crossed a line, and there was no going back now. She stood up from the bed, letting the sheet fall away, revealing her body in the soft light. My breath hitched as I took her in, but this time, the sight of her didn't bring the same rush of excitement. Now, it just reminded me of the mess we were in. "I need to figure things out," she said softly, more to herself than to me. Her voice was calm, but I could see the turmoil in her eyes, the conflict she was wrestling with. "Zach, I need to tell him." The mention of her boyfriend's name hit me like a punch to the gut, and suddenly, the full weight of the situation crashed down on me. This wasn't just about Alexis and me anymore. There were other people involved, other lives we were about to upend with this secret. "Alexis, are you sure that's a good idea?" I asked, my voice laced with concern. The last thing I wanted was for her to get hurt. And I knew Zach. He wasn't the kind of guy who took betrayal lightly. She looked up at me, her expression conflicted. "I don't know what else to do," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I can't keep lying to him. It's not fair." I took a step toward her, reaching out to take her hand. Her skin was warm and soft, and I could feel the slight tremble in her fingers as I held her. "Alexis, maybe we just take some time," I suggested gently. "Think things through before making any decisions. You don't have to do this right now." She met my gaze, and for a moment, I thought she was going to agree. But then she pulled her hand away, wrapping her arms around herself, as if trying to shield herself from the weight of everything that was happening. "I can't live like this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not." I wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that we could figure this out together, that we didn't have to rush into anything. But deep down, I knew she was right. We had crossed the line, and there was no going back. The only way forward was to face the consequences, no matter how painful they might be. "I'll talk to him," she said finally, her voice resolute. "I'll tell him the truth." My stomach churned at the thought of what that conversation would look like. Zach wasn't the kind of guy who handled bad news well, especially not this kind. I didn't want Alexis to get hurt. I didn't want things to spiral out of control, but there was nothing I could do to stop it now. She looked at me one last time, her eyes filled with a mix of regret and something else I couldn't quite place. "I'm sorry, Max," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I never meant for this to happen." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to fix any of this. All I knew was that I was about to walk out of this room, and nothing would ever be the same again. Without another word, I grabbed my jacket from the chair and made my way to the door. As I reached for the handle, I hesitated, turning back to look at her one last time. Alexis stood there, wrapped in the sheet, looking as lost and uncertain as I felt. And then, before I could change my mind, I walked out. The night air hit me like a slap in the face, cold and biting, as I stepped outside. The party was still raging in the background, the music and laughter a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in my mind. I shoved my hands into my pockets and started walking, my thoughts a jumbled mess of guilt, fear, and regret. I had no idea what would happen next. All I knew was that I had just crossed a line I could never uncross. And now, there was no turning back.